So, hello everyone. I wanted to make this video. This is like really spur of the moment. A lot of the times when I try to think about making videos and stuff, it's a very cerebral process, and a lot of the times the planning takes longer than the doing of it. And tonight I just really wanted to go ahead and kind of go on a rant and express some things that I've been feeling that kind of really came up today. So every now and again, I rely on public media, honestly, in a very serious way, to kind of educate me, but also to teach me the stories of how people are affected by some of the problems that we hear about in society. And one of the reasons I do it is not just for the learning of it, but it's really for that experiential piece of understanding how people are affected in a way maybe that is deeper than what reports and headlines and data and generalizing is able to accomplish. Another thing is too that they just frankly, like a lot of the times when I watch public media or I hear things, it gives me a good cry. It's a good way to empathize with people who are struggling in ways that I'm not, and I'm privileged to kind of be insulated from in a lot of the ways. And I do this regularly, and this is a part of kind of like how I operate. I'm an emotional person, and I'm also someone who's curious, and I kind of get a dual benefit of the emotionality with the learning and the education. But tonight it hit me in a different way, where the realization was, I do this regularly, and I'm sure everyone else kind of is having their cry moment or like this is really horrible moment. And I always ask this question: how long am I going to have to is this going to just be like some academic experience for? How long are these subjects going to just be like news reports that kind of seem episodic in time and don't seem to blend into this larger image of a broken society, a society that works well for quite a few people, a very few people really, and does not work well for mostly everyone else. These are stories in one way or another, or in one frame or another. You just hear, but a different way, that society is broken. And in one way, this is just kind of what you do as a citizen. All you can do is kind of learn in that way, and that's the best, whatever. But it's just really frustrating, especially now. I always used to ask this question, what is the limit for how far people can go, or how low the bar can go? And, I would have joked and said, I'm sure a pandemic. I'm sure when there's a global pandemic, the bar is that low, maybe the bar is right there, and politicians and leaders in society will start to take it seriously as a collective. Obviously, the number, the representation of people who are really kind of being oppositional or challenging public health responses, it's a very small subcategory of the political right, particularly, right? But at the same time, it's very influential, and it creates all these different ripples in society, and there's all this stuff about the Overton window and things that I don't really want to talk about. What I really want to focus on is, the moment is so dire. So, a lot of the times when you hear these stories, at least when I hear these stories from Frontline, This American Life, there are just so many shows, honestly. I'll just, full transparency for the audience, I have a tattoo of NPR and PBS on my arm, and it's in one way just kind of like a really idiosyncratic thing to say, hey, I love you, NPR and PBS, but it's also like a reminder. These are institutions that are rare and more important than anything else in terms of the media landscape in society. This is how I put it to people, they tell the story of the news. So, in a lot of ways, you read the news, and like the AP or Politico, I read all these things, but it doesn't tell the narrative of how people are affected in the same way. And I hear that, and I cry a lot of the times when I hear deep stories, and I love it because it reminds me that the world is dark. But here's the point, that this is how long? So we're in a global pandemic, right? It's incredible. So the story I was listening to tonight was a Frontline documentary, and it was about essentially the particular challenges that are faced by undocumented migrants and undocumented families in the United States in the wake of this pandemic. And it just tells a really stark, I mean, obviously, right, this is a situation in which you hear enough in the headlines, or you hear enough or you see enough in news reports, statements that there's a disproportional effect, a disproportional impact on, on Black families, on Black individuals, on Hispanic and Latinx individuals, and, also on undocumented families. So this is something I hear in the news, but for some reason, watching this documentary and seeing the story of how these families were really affected and seeing them cry, I just don't understand how, with all of this out there, this real information, this very real and grave and dire information, decision makers and people in general don't have unity around this subject. It's really incredible. I used to be very cynical years ago, very misanthropic, not a lot of hope. And, in the last few years, especially, I've been more involved. I do a lot of advocacy with young people. I myself, just full transparency as well, and I'm comfortable saying this, that, I have experience in the foster care system, and I work in foster care advocacy. And in that work, it pulled me out of that cynicism. It showed me the power of people. It showed me the power of individual voices and the power of resilience. And some of my colleagues and peers and friends in foster care, they've been through things that I can't imagine and haven't been through. My experience in foster care was very privileged in a lot of ways. But in any case, the point really is, my work in that community raises my hope. But then I see documentaries like this, and then I hear about the facts and the reality of the situation and the graveness. And it's just really hard to stay hopeful. It's really unfortunate. I'm someone also who tries not to get emotional to the point where I lose sight of that fact, being fact-based, or being, as nearly objective as I can be in my analysis and all of that. And it gets hard in a way, because a lot of the times it's really, so there's the philosophical challenges of free speech and, ideological diversity and how you handle that. But then there's the other side of it that gets really emotional for me, which is the public health risk, the immediate non-academic existential risk that gets posed by certain people. Again, relatively few number of people, but still enough to kind of shake the boat of a few people who disrupt and challenge and doubt not even just specific policies that the government's prescribing to handle the pandemic, but really the foundation of it. And in a lot of ways, the federal government has failed. I'll be the first to say, the CDC, the Trump administration, again, these are things that are probably, not even probably. These are nearly objectively agreeable statements of fact that the federal government has failed in its response to coronavirus. I think that there's that, but then there's kind of taking it that step further and kind of getting a little conspiratorial about it. And I think, those are the kinds of things that become especially problematic. And these are the kinds of things, too, where, and that's just one dimension of this, right? Because I actually maybe don't even want to go down that road, because this is a tangent I've been wanting to go on for a while, and I really want to make sure I stay focused, because there's a lot of depth and breadth and nuance to this. Because the subject of the documentary tonight, for example, was about the experiences of undocumented migrants who are undocumented families who are affected by COVID. This disproportional and really horrible impact is also has to do with immigration system, a very broken immigration system that has knowingly been broken, that everyone agrees has been broken for decades. Even Democrats and Republicans who are opposed and different in their policy choices and their ideologies around these subjects all agree unanimously that our immigration system is broken. It's not just something for Congress to handle, and it's not just something to read a report about or have some statistics about. This is something I especially understand deeply in my professional experience and my advocacy experience. At the end of every statistic is a story and a person and a family, and it gets to a point where it's just outright, it's outright immoral. It's it's a very shameful situation, honestly. I am happily and gratefully going into an occupation of being a professor of political science, and starting to have to really think about political science. Um, and it's been an interesting exercise, and it's been a reminder for me of this thing I've felt for such a long time, that we live in the so-called most deliberative democracy in the world, a liberal democracy where there's all these committees and institutions and actors and this, in a lot of ways, institutionally, a lot of power that citizens have, at least on paper. In practice and in administration, it doesn't really exist in an equitable way. But, despite that, we have these fundamental problems, whether it's immigration or literally even just budgeting. Our federal government can't even budget itself. It's hampered by a broken political system. So our government can't do the budgeting to actually handle the pandemic response. It has this immigration system that's like broken and just basically like puts people in like shadows, and there are very few opportunities for families to be meaningfully benefited by public systems, or public health systems even for that matter. And this goes beyond like policy decisions or policy arguments about the appropriateness of the legality or the appropriateness policy argument that kind of exists in this box. But what we're seeing right now is a pandemic where people get affected, and a lot of the times too, undocumented workers are essential workers, just as people who are essential workers are also being disproportionately impacted. So it seems irrational and dangerous and unreasonable to keep this very truncated, fixed box of what should be appropriate in immigration at this time, and to not extend fully and meaningfully and in a way that's equitable and affordable for these families, but allow people to be cared for, allow people to receive appropriate medical treatment, allow people to receive post-release, I don't even know the term necessarily, but when they were released from the hospital, services and, connections to social services to benefit these families. Because poverty, what we're seeing right now is that not only is poverty a moral hazard, and not only is poverty a moral shame and stain on this country, that so many people are impoverished, and that so many people who are not impoverished are still struggling to just afford a simple life. We need to really think about the implications that this has on public health, because we're seeing it. This is kind of the point of intersectionality. And it's just really, I don't know how to sit with this. It really is a frustrating thing, because, I used to talk about this stuff, and I still do talk about this stuff with my friends and my colleagues and whoever else, and this is just kind of seems like banter in a lot of the ways. It just kind of seems like a conversation. But this is, it's hard to put words to how real the situation is, how real the situation always was. There's nothing different necessarily about now. COVID is the thing that makes things matter perhaps more, or be more visible. But the problem of poverty, the problem of a broken immigration system, the problem of the fact that the government can't budget itself, the problem of the fact that Congress, for years before COVID, was defunding its own pandemic response programs, this says something deep about society's collective capability to address major issues. And there's something that needs to change. And I know that this is like a cliche, right? Like everybody says this, but that's exactly the point. Everybody says this, and there doesn't really seem to be any action. And I don't anticipate any action in the Trump administration. So all of this is with the caveat that we really have to wait till November for the election, and then January for the incoming or the onboarding of the Trump, or goodness forbid, of the hopeful Biden administration. And I say hopeful with a few caveats as well. I mean, I think, lesser of two evils, right? But it's just incredible, it really is incredible. I think COVID has exposed so many things that have always been problems, but now pose significant societal harm if they're not addressed. And I first started thinking about this with the issue, well, not the issue, but the subject of the unemployment extension benefits that Congress had given, that $600 additional a week, and how that kind of brought up, reignited this conversation about universal basic income. And that was a policy that took me a little bit longer, perhaps, than others to get comfortable with. But I support universal basic income. I think, especially now, like when we see that linking labor with well-being, and labor with income, and labor with resources, and labor with all these different monetary, fiscal, material things, like in that way, that's a problem. That presents like incredible problems. I am another way I'm very privileged is I do remote work. I don't really I'm not in a situation I was a few years ago, and I will never forget those days. And this is one of the reasons I'm so impassioned about this, because I remember those days where I had to go out, I had to work, I didn't have the chance or the ability to take a day off. There was a period of time for 6 months where I was working 7 days a week, literally, 10 hours a day. I was still washing dishes, and I just so happened to love it anyway because I listened to NPR and PBS and all these amazing podcasts. I basically just got paid to learn, but it was strenuous. I'm in a committed relationship. I couldn't see my partner. I hardly, right? I could hardly sleep. I could hardly do a lot of things. And this is the situation that many people are in. And this is the situation that many people are in who also have families, who also have children. I was, my partner also made a lot of money. Not a lot of money, but enough so that the meager money I was making with the strenuous, difficult labor that I was putting forward, we were always comfortable. People, families who were not uncomfortable before COVID, that was always a horrible thing. That was always something that needs to change. But with COVID, I just think that it's like at a point where I don't even know why these are questions. I don't even know why there's a debate about the baseline that things need to change. Look, I work in public the field of public policy, if that's what I want to put, how I want to put it. I understand the particulars, the minutia, that at the end of the day things have to get negotiated, and at the end of the day there's going to be a policy that gets put on paper, and it's not as simple as making grandiose statements. Fair, right? But there must be a consensus understanding of the problem, and a consensus understanding that there really are some things in the suite of options that ought not to be questioned, in a sense. The efficacy of, I won't say ought not to be questioned, I'll say that have an established evidence base and it's not appropriate to question, because the efficacy of certain policies has been well substantiated. Face coverings, social distancing policies, these are all things that are demonstrably helpful. However, we have a political culture, a political environment and landscape where these basic things are debated. The basic efficacy of face coverings and face masks is being questioned, and it's posing it's already posed an incredible risk. This is honestly, I don't really want to say the word because I'm trying to be diplomatic, but it's crazy. I mean, it's just outright crazy. I think it belies so much of an understanding of, or rather, an ability to trust or a confidence in public institutions and what the government is saying. And again, caveat: federal government failed, yada yada. But I mean, like, that's a step before doubting face coverings and doubting the spirit of social distancing policies. Because I think people, as a platitude, like, agree, right? But it's pretty clear people are not effectively and probably even intentionally trying to mitigate these things. It's just, the fact that this is, like, in the context of what we're talking about, it's like disrupts the situation, and it, like, takes airtime away from the meaningful things that probably should be talked about, like policies about how you reopen society, how you do the state's reopening. Let's go back a few months to the White House when they put out these recommendations, these phases for how the states should basically, like, reopen, and it was so vague, just like time and time again, the White House, federal government, whatever, didn't do a great job. But, like, we kind of need to go back to a place of thinking about how to address this, right? But, like, not obviously in that way. Like, kick those kinds of people not kick them out of the room, because they're supposed to be there, given that they're elected officials in that way. But I would like to see a situation perhaps where people like Donald Trump and people who doubt significantly the virtue and spirit and efficacy of social distancing and whatever else mitigated policy related to COVID. I would like to not see those elected officials in office. I think that they kind of sour the political climate in a way in terms of, like, addressing this. And that's the only thing, like, being the institutional person I am, that's the only thing I can think besides, the word I don't like to use a lot or think about a lot, which is, like, revolution and stuff. And it's just like, it's going to have to happen in a way, like a political revolution, the kind of revolution that Bernie Sanders talks about. It's just a lot to have to think about, and I know I'm not the only one thinking about this, and I know that I am able to think about this in a different way because of the different layers of who I am and how I come to these discussions. Frankly, full transparency, just being a white, cis, able-bodied, hetero male. These dimensions matter. I think it's irrational, honestly, to doubt the validity of that notion, that who you are and how you come to these discussions plays a role in how you perceive and go about, etc., these discussions. But this is just, I don't know, this is just kind of like a rant for everyone, or a rant for me. I'm just tired of having these, like, good cry moments, these educational moments, these, wow, did you hear what I wrote on PBS kinds of moments. This is crazy that this is something that I was resolute with for a time, that this is something that people are resolute with. Every time we hear a so-called interesting story, and they are interesting in a way, right? But, like, every time you hear one of these, and I've always had this understanding, let me be clear, but I think it hit me differently today. But every time you hear one of these stories, you are listening to the experience of an individual. Oftentimes an individual, almost always an individual, who is subject to these bigger circumstances and these bigger forces that are so influential and so consequential. And it's just incredible, that this is something that's just become a constant, that's just become, like, a static fact. That news agencies will go and they'll do their reporting, and there'll always be something to report on, or at least like, I know that there will always be something to report on, but, like, I don't think this is what I meant. I don't think that this is what reasonable people meant. The fact that we're constantly reporting on poverty, the fact that we're constantly reporting on disproportionality, the fact that we're constantly reporting on the problems of COVID, the fact that we're constantly reporting on so many things, the brokenness of capitalism, those are the words that do not get spoken. This is a constellation of facts that we see, that are clear, and that are clearly drawn for us if we can connect the dots. But That's a big part of this. You know, a broken capitalist system, and this like mythic concept that we have about it. You know, I don't know where else to go besides just complaining in different ways. There's just so much. And part of the purpose of Discourse from Discord, you know, we don't do that many videos. You know, I'd like to do more, but in any case, you know, the purpose of this channel and the purpose of having discourse, not even just with us, like take us out of it and you as a viewer, whoever might view this one day, right? The importance of discourse and the importance of even for people who doubt face coverings, being able to discuss and weigh the facts and have to develop a consensus understanding of the facts. This is so important. We need this now more than ever. I get frightened by the harm and the insidiousness of what we saw in 2016 with Russian misinformation and Chinese misinformation, and now in 2020, apparently Chinese and Russian misinformation, as well as misinformation from Iran. The epistemological harms that come along with this, I think, are tremendous, and I think are present. They are visible and evident, but this is not being reflected on. I think that the disruption in our I just prefer to say epistemic. Tomato, tomato. Epistemic, epistemological. But I say epistemic. But really, the disruption and the chaos that this has caused to our epistemic understanding of our world and our political system, it's gone deeper than just understanding the brokenness of our government. I understand the brokenness of our government. I do not go as far as to say some of the other things that kind of get born out of a landscape of misinformation and disinformation and you know, again, this is me being diplomatic. It is nearly objective, however. A small but loud and politically far-right media landscape that blurs the lines and propounds and does all these different things to muddy the water and come close to seeming like even further political right zealots. All of this is incredible. It's causing so much havoc. It's causing so much harm. I don't know where to go with it. I'm just sick of it. You know, it's just, there's no, I mean, you know, I don't really know what to change it on. Like, I think that there's obviously the NDOs, whatever, like, you know, change the politics, change the policy. But, like, what does that actually mean? You know, it really starts with people having discussions. And this is a rant, right? You know, so this is just me, like, talking at you or you, the eventual listener. But this is also me trying to model difficult discussions and trying to show to people that expressing these things is a process. It's a process to be careful and to not... I don't put my cards... what's the phrase? I don't know. I keep some of my cards close to my vest, in the sense that, like, I don't show the full coloring of my views. I'm diplomatic in the way that I characterize things. I am nonetheless assertive and careful about the facts and the evidence that I bring forward. But at the same time, you know, I approach things with an open perspective. There was a period of time a few weeks ago where I was a little less open on these subjects of particularly like systematic racism. I am in a different place now, where I think I'm able to hear pushback and not get angry. Because frankly, a few weeks ago, I was just getting angry. Like I would just hear people provide pushback or try to contradict systematic racism as a theory, or really a framework, or intersectionality as a framework, or the virtue and benefit of social justice. I was not a place to listen to that stuff a few weeks ago. So that's I'm not perfect, right? But I had to recenter myself and put myself back in this mode of thinking, like, look, these are challenging conversations. These are challenging times. These are personal issues for people, and that's not just in the social justice way of thinking. I wasn't. No. I ought not to say was. I was not. I didn't come at it from this place a few years ago. Now I do. And I'm not saying that everyone necessarily has to come at it the way I do, or maybe the way on the political left or the progressive side may think of things. I'm not saying that. I just think that there's kind of like I even think this among conservative people or on the political right. I'm someone. I just think that there's a good way to make an argument. I don't have to agree with it. I can take on a good argument and not agree with it. It happens all the time. I listen to, some people might be familiar with some on the libertarian side, a man named Tom Woods. I listen to Tom Woods. He's a very old-fashioned, I'll say, libertarian. I can't think of the word. I think he would say like a thick libertarian. He has this concept for thinking about thick or thin libertarianism. But in any case, I listen to libertarians. Tom Woods. I listen to scholars at the Cato Institute. I listen to the Cato podcast daily. They're literally called the Cato Daily Podcast. On the a little bit more conservative side, I don't do it often, but I've read the National Review before. Every now and again, I do like to turn to the pages. I am a fan when I read an article from Ramesh Ponnuru or see an interview with him or a report that he provides. I think he's a good journalist. He's a good thinker for the kind of neoconservative thinking that he brings forward. There are people across the spectrum who do that, right? At least that's how we should really put ourselves in that mode of thinking, because and it's, again, I don't agree with these people, but I think it helps me expand my thinking. It helps me understand these subjects, or how to discuss these subjects with people who might feel that way. In other words, if I go to a libertarian person, I feel better at having that conversation based on watching these other people. But there's also something that enhances one's thinking that comes from that too. It's about understanding the ingredients of a good argument, or the ingredients of a good theory, are not the kinds of normative things that we kind of land on as conclusions among each other. But they are analytical ingredients. They are epistemic ingredients that get blended together to make a good argument, or to make a good theory. And even good theories I don't agree with. They're just theories, right? Obviously we don't need to go that rabbit hole of amount of conspiracy theorists, right? Like, I mean that obviously with a baseline of reason, method. There's all these things that make discourse, that make good argument take place, that create a space where people who disagree can talk and move forward with something, or even respectfully disagree. All these things that are just so lacking. It's just it's just so frustrating not to be cynical. I really try not to be cynical. I try to keep the faith, because at the end of the day, I have the faith. I think I was having a conversation with someone a few days ago, and we landed on this idea of the spiritual drain that comes along with capitalism, kind of, and frankly, the hope that a socialist analysis can bring to thinking about issues. And I'm not saying that in the sense that I'm trying to promote strongly the theory of socialism, but socialism as an analysis to understand the emotions and the feelings and the dynamics, all these different things going on in society and their relationship to a capitalist system, a socialist analysis or some type of progressive, humanitarian, intersectional analysis, it elucidates a lot. It provides a lot of great information. It takes a level of understanding further than what may have been able to go without that analysis. These are things that, and it doesn't have to go that way either, right? I think in a very different way to use a libertarian argument, something that I'm very persuaded by. And this is particularly, this started off as something that was a libertarian argument, but, ending the drug war. The promotion of the rights of sex workers, the legalization of the consumption of drugs and the consumption of sex. It sounds weird, but legalizing sex work. These are things that kind of started off on the libertarian side. Oh, also civil asset forfeiture. There's a lot of things actually that kind of started on the libertarian side that with the right analysis, I have an understanding. And a lot of the times, it's kind of uncomfortable. It gives me a stomachache to reconcile some of these maybe what I'll call libertarian things with the kind of progressive soul that I have. It's not kind of that hard because a lot of the ways libertarianism gets a bad rep, but they are in a lot of ways socially progressive, just to be fair. I just think that honestly, merely objectively, there's just one group of people that are just causing a lot of problems, and it's one group with a bunch of well, it's really a subgroup. So it's a subgroup with a bunch of subgroups in it, but it's the far political right. These just, it just, there's a lot of things that come along with that, and it all goes back to and I'm going to get a little more lecturally actually. Because if anybody's sat through the whole time here, you're probably, and I mean this for future viewers particularly too, but you're probably going to stay. I'm going to take this a little political in a second because I think the time that we're in right now is a consequence of a political culture and a shift in politics and all these different things. What I really tie a lot of this back to is the 2010 election, the midterm election, and this was the time where I was newly getting interested in politics, and I would watch C-SPAN for hours, and I watched a lot of speeches from the Tea Party, and I watched a lot of commentary from the Tea Party and a lot of the stuff that was happening with the elections. And you watch also what happens on Capitol. I watched what happened on Capitol Hill, and you would just kind of hear the Republican Party embrace a lot of the patriotism and aggressiveness and subtle nationalism that came along with the Tea Party. At the time we called nationalism American exceptionalism. And I think this is a pretty sound argument actually. I think the surge of the Tea Party in Congress has somewhat of a kind of a decent amount to do with the circumstances that we are in today. I think that the surge of the Tea Party in Congress did a few things. It created a new political bloc in the House of Representatives. So we saw that namely with the House Freedom Caucus. Some of the founders, actually, of the House Freedom Caucus are now serving in the Trump, were serving in the Trump White House. Mick Mulvaney, and there were other people who helped found the House Freedom Caucus, which was essentially primarily was composed of people in the Tea Party, and the House Freedom Caucus shifted the political culture and then also institutionally gummed up the works. And it wasn't just in the House, it was in the Senate as well. Some of the more conservative members that we saw get elected in the Senate were, Mike Lee, I think, and others. But basically what we saw is basically a political shift and an institutional going of the works, in the sense that in the Senate there was a lot of use of the filibuster in ways that really hadn't historically been used. This had, really affected a lot of the executive nominations made by the Obama administration. And at the time, in 2013, Harry Reid, I think it was 2015, excuse me. In any case, one of those years, Harry Reid, I think it was 2013. Harry Reid basically enacted this rule that prevented a filibuster on certain executive nominees. And it was kind of seen as this low point in the Senate. And arguably, this was a consequence, really, of the political right. In particular, I remember Rand Paul and Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, I think, had set a record at the time of 21 hours filibuster. We saw this abuse of the filibuster, this new abuse of the filibuster that seemed to coincide with the surge of the Tea Party. On the House side, the House Freedom Caucus, they blocked a lot of bills. They wouldn't negotiate with the rest of the House establishment, and they would say a lot of radical things. And they promoted very heavily a lot of very conservative bills. And they had a lot of impact in that way. We all remember perhaps Ted Cruz, shutting down the government, essentially, by refusing to take part in a vote. All these different things that led to a political landscape that allowed for Donald Trump. And in a way, that's really fascinating, because in 2012, after the election where Mitt Romney lost, Republicans did a little bit of reflection and wondering why they lost, because in 2012, not only did Republicans lose, but they essentially lost along all non-white voting demographics. That's crazy. Not crazy. It's actually pretty understandable. But if I was a Republican, I'd be like, well, that's crazy. How do we fix that? Because that's not good. They developed this report called the Republican Autopsy, and basically, some of the findings from the Republican Autopsy report, that they need to embrace Latinx voters, that they need to embrace women voters, that they need to diversify their electoral, their candidate pool, and at the time it got a lot of reporting and a lot of framing, oh man, that's a good idea, we're going to do it. But we obviously they didn't even come close. We saw Trump emerge as the candidate in 2016, which is kind of like a statement, a symbol of how far that plan failed, the whole revamping the party kind of thing. And at the same time as that, as the Tea Party was taking place, there was a lot of bubbling about of conspiracy theories. There was a period of time where I was very fascinated by conspiracy theories, and I would spend hours watching Alex Jones and other figures like David Icke, Jordan Maxwell, We Are Change, Mark I don't remember his name, but basically the point is all these people that I used to listen to, right? Conspiracy theorists. I was not a conspiracy theorist. I was really fascinated, honestly, by the epistemological dynamics taking place. That this is a group of people that has arguments and has evidence and has reports about what they believe, and they believe totally different things from other people who have reports, arguments, data, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I saw, and I couldn't quite put words to it at the time, but I saw a popularity and a widening of the circle of who believed in conspiracy theories and who followed conspiracy theories. And I think it really went unassessed for a long period of time, unreported. And now conspiracy theories are commonplace. Now conspiracy theories are commonplace, and a more radical and frankly a more radically right political culture has taken over. And they when you spin those two things together, that's not such a good thing. It's that's some of my theory for some of where we are today. And I think that, again, this turned into like an intellectual discussion, but let's not forget where this started. This started with hearing a story on Frontline about the struggles and the particular challenges faced by undocumented migrants in the wake of COVID-19. And it started with a broadening of my understanding that these circumstances that are horrible now in COVID were always horrible and are only being exacerbated. And this is one of many instances where these problems are being exacerbated. It's not just about immigration. Like I said, it's about budgeting. There's deep problems about race equity and social justice, the rights of LGBTQ plus individuals, all these different things. A broken economy, and it just sucks. It sucks just having to prognosticate. It sucks, and because what do we do? Where do we go? How do we change this? What's going to be the first domino to fall? In the sense that there's progress. How much more can there be where there's no, I didn't even get to how the Senate adjourned for the month without any plan for an additional COVID bill, basically leaving America with American citizens, American families, who it's not even clear that they'll be getting their unemployment benefits to even the 400. Because of the executive order clause about the $100 contribution for states, it's not likely that that'll be sustainable. So we might be talking about $300 a week additionally, which is half of what was originally prescribed by Congress. Now that doesn't, but that 300 is because the president, he doesn't even care. It's because the president wanted to make a campaign statement. But this is where we are. A broken system that it's so broken that they're not even pretending, that they're just going home. And when we hear in the news that individuals are not receiving their money, or they are not being considered, really, in the same way that corporations and industries are, it just presents it just presents like a really horrible situation. How much lower can the bar go? We're seeing the bar descend past a pandemic, past the point of not being able to respond to a pandemic. So what levels are below where we are right now? Because to me, it seems like a lot of the levels are more people dying, more people being disempowered, weakened, harmed from a political system that not only doesn't help them, but helps people who don't need help, a political system that benefits elites. There was a lot of conversation, public conversation and news reporting about the provisions of the COVID bills about unemployment insurance, but what was never negotiated, or what never seems to be a negotiating point, were the benefits that were given to corporations and industries. When that's the case, what is someone supposed to think? What is a family supposed to think? What are people who are not fortunate or not privileged, really, supposed to think? People without supports. Many people who I know, many people who I work with, many people who I see get affected. And these are people. These are families. These are feelings. These are generations. These are moral subjects. These are humans. And they suffer. And they suffer. And the world keeps spinning, and the politics keeps going, and the fundraising keeps happening, and the negotiations happen in some superficial, non-substantive way, and then they stop happening, and the circumstances get worse. There's fear of a resurgence of COVID. Schools are having to reopen because the federal government is essentially putting them in a position before they are able or prepared or ready or willing to do so. How much more can there be? How much lower can the bar go? It's just like, it hurts. It hurts particularly because I'm privileged. I don't have, these are things, these are different worlds than the world I experience. It's hard to think about how, as an individual, I can do something, or I can have a system that I can trust that people will be cared for. I see worlds where there's political discussions about basic moral principles and basic moral subjects. And I just, I don't know where to go with it. It hurts. It makes me angry. It makes me confused. It makes me feel hopeless. And that's where I sit with it. So, we this channel gives me hope. Seeing change gives me hope. Having conversation gives me hope with people even that I might disagree with. I just think that that's the only way. That's the way we do this. Even if we don't necessarily land on a specific conclusion or a thing that we might want to move forward with. I mean, just the mere fact that we can be in a situation where we can discuss things and try to at least move forward from something or establish some type of agreement, a consensus agreement. We can't even do that. Is this what it looks like when Russian disinformation? Well, when internet disinformation wins? Is this what that looks like? Are we seeing that? Where else can we go? I don't know. Right now I'm at a point. I'll be a little flippant to say that I am trying to make it to an hour here, but I don't know what else to say that I haven't already said. And this isn't a soapbox necessarily. This channel is not supposed to be a soapbox. I just got so angry when I was watching that documentary and I was crying and I was feeling all these things, and this is something that I do regularly. I embrace those moments. They make me whole. They are enriching. But tonight was a night where it kind of boiled over, and I wanted to share to the to the X amount of people. That's a glass half full way of putting it. Who might watch this video, but this is not a feeling that's exclusive to me. This is something that many people are feeling. This is something that many people are crying about. This is something that people are crying about, not in some abstract way, like I might be. These are people who are crying about it because they have to go through it. Families that, are no longer receiving the support that they received. Families that are getting sick, whose family members are getting sick. Watching a political system where it's clear that people, the general population, it's clear that they are not a priority of Congress. And when I say that, I am speaking of the institution. I am speaking particularly to the Senate and the Republicans in the Senate, and also in a lot of ways Republicans in the House of Representatives, who are refusing to condemn and have refused to condemn or distance themselves from a candidate in the House who it seems by likelihood will win, but I will not name, who supports the QAnon conspiracy theory. There were others who did not win their primaries who also seem to have an association to the QAnon conspiracy theory. And what they think they're doing is politically advantageous. It probably is. Not for long. And it's not moral. And it's not good. They're not statesmen or stateswomen. They're the worst iteration of what a politician should be. And Democrats are not saints. I think the Democratic Party needs to do some serious reflection on what it stands for and who it represents. The Democratic Party needs to either change or give space for a progressive other party. And this goes for both parties, because the reason that there's no third party is, in a lot of the ways, because of the strength of the two political parties in controlling our electoral process on a federal level and in the 50 states and jurisdictions throughout the United States. But the way things are just cannot continue. I have hope, however, in spite of all of this. I look forward to a Biden administration. It's not ideal for me as a progressive, but it is not Trump, and it's also not as crazy, maybe, as others might feel. But I just don't know where to go with these things sometimes. This is our world. And what a world it is. I just wish everyone well. I wish everyone health. And I wish the government can do its job to protect the people.